Boom. And it says we are live. Can you confirm that from the cockpit up there, Martz?
Checking.
That would be fabulous.
Yeah.
So once again, our Tuesday little warriors, thank you very much for joining us on TeaFlix. We're very excited today to have the busiest man in showbiz, certainly for the last year or so. He is a lad of Northern Ireland, and he's a Northern Irish writer, producer, and director with a diverse career spanning television, film, and literature. He was raised in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and he's worked on projects across the UK, Hollywood, Canada, Denmark, Finland, Poland, South Africa, and Thailand. And if that's not enough, his notable works include the action thriller Johnny Was, starring Vinnie Jones, Eric LaSalle, and Patrick Bergin, which Johnny Was garnered multiple festival awards. Mm-hmm. Brendan also wrote and directed The Riddle in 2006, featuring Sir Derek Jacobi, one of my absolute favorite actors, and Vanessa Redgrave, another fan favorite. In TV, he co-wrote the Nordic Noir series Cold Courage for Lionsgate and Viaplay. It might be Viaplay. I might have that wrong, but we'll ask. And he adapted The Man Who Died for Elisa Viaplay, which became their most successful series in 2022. His new project, Sherlock Daughter, premiered on the CW, KTLA here in LA, just a couple of weeks ago, April 16th, and Discovery Plus in the UK and Ireland. And they've secured international distribution for all sorts of places, including Scandinavia, Australia, and Russia. So welcome, Brendan Foley.
Hi, Brendan.
Hey, lovely to see you both.
Yeah, you too.
Absolutely.
You are a busy boy.
Yeah, it's like Belfast buses. You wait for 30 years and then 3 come along at once.
That's right. That's right.
But before we get into the story of your latest hit, Sherlock and Daughter, let's wind back to the beginning. Your career began in journalism, covering topics like business, the environment, and conflict in numerous countries. How has your journalistic background shaped your narrative style for screenwriting?
I think pretty completely, in that little lad growing up in Belfast, the only thing I was ever any use at was writing in any form. And sort of the Mount Olympus for me when I was a kid was the Belfast Telegraph, which it was just the toppermost of the poppermost, as someone might say. And so from a really early age, that was all I wanted to do. And I started writing for them, just freelancing, sending in articles, and they were kind enough to bring me in, for some training along the way. At the time, I thought I was a trainee, but looking back on it, I was a mascot for all these hard-bitten, hard-drinking journos who you can imagine in the middle of the Troubles, there was no shortage of bad news. So actually for me, it was a fantastic place to learn, and they were great people to learn from. So really it shaped me in probably slightly later in the day. So when I left Northern Ireland when I was 18 and was freelancing pretty much ever since in that world. I lived in York, went to university in York, and lived in York for some years after that, and was freelancing for all sorts of people. So I think my favorite story of moving from Northern Ireland to York is I was freelancing for some very sleepy little North Yorkshire local paper, and I had been brought up with this sort of hard news and explosions and jailbreaks and intrigue and politics, and so they left me in charge for 5 minutes, and they said, "Oh, if anything happens, just write up what you think it deserves, and off you go." And there was a post office robbery. And it was a failed post office robbery. No one hurt, nothing taken, half-assed, something or other. And in Belfast, this would have merited sort of 2 paragraphs on page 17 next to the explosions and the intrigue and the politics and the army or whatever. And so I banged out a few paragraphs and went home and got a screeching phone call from the editor saying, "This is the biggest bloody thing that's happened here in 20 years. You've done 2 paragraphs."
Oh, how funny.
So it taught me that not all things are the same in all places.
No.
And from then on, I did 15 or 20 years of mostly international features, a lot of business, some conflict. Just from that Belfast background, I covered conflicts in Africa and South America, but mostly business and the environment and so on. So I ended up working in 77 countries over those years. And I was hopped around a lot. It doesn't do much for your social life, but it's great for getting to know people in different parts of the world. So I mean, that taught me at one level, obviously everyone's the same. We're all human beings, but also there are all these really interesting, quirky differences between cultures and between, young and old, and any subdivision you want. There are just these fantastic, interesting differences that are all so different in different cultures. So that sort of set me off for everything I did subsequently. So I went into writing, producing, and directing indie features. I wrote books, and all of them have been in some way cross-cultural, not in a sort of, I'm going to do something worthy and cross-cultural, but just because that's what fascinates me. So from doing that in films, doing it in books, about 10 years ago, I noticed I was going to the movies less and less often, and I was watching more and more great TV. So I thought, the one thing you have as a writer is that your skill is very portable. And I think second only to being a hairdresser. That's if you want to travel the world, that's the way to go. I used to say for being a sailor from Liverpool as well. But for me, I had this one portable skill, and I had all of this experience of different cultures. So when I went into TV, I was just immediately happy as a clam doing it. It just feels like, in a way, if I could jump in a time machine, I'd do it earlier in the game. But I'm loving it, and it's taken a few years to get my boots on. But now I have quite a few
That's fantastic.
series on the go, which is pretty rare in our stormy time. So I'm enjoying it while I can. Anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
It just occurred to me that with all these countries you've lived and worked in, how on earth did Shelley manage to trap you?
Oh dear! So
for our viewers, Brendan is married to the lovely and
groovy Shelley,
incredibly also writing talented Shelly Goldstein, and she is just one of our favorite people. So how on earth did you guys meet?
Yeah, I was extremely fortunate, and so 27 years ago, so it's been a while. I was, it's amazing. It's shot by and fits of laughter usually. I can highly recommend if you want to find your life partner, find someone who makes you laugh on a daily or if not hourly basis. So find a comedy writer. So myself and Shelley, I was thinking, at the time, so I was a journalist. I was working in London, and I really wanted to learn the world of screenwriting, and I thought, well, they do that very well in Hollywood, so I'll try to inveigle myself into this writers group in Hollywood. And it was just at the stage, the sort of Neolithic stage of the internet. So if you cast your mind back to a time when you logged in, you had to use a phone line, and the modem went boinga boinga boing, something along those lines.
The electronic boomerang, ba-doing, ba-doing.
Yeah, exactly. And so I spent a day sort of carefully crafting this whatever, a post or an email, saying that, I'm a writer, and I've been a journalist, and I've written books, and humble bragging away. And in order to get through the door, which had a large notice saying, Hollywood screenwriters only. Yeah. And so I duly sent that off, and the technology was at such an early stage that somewhere between London and Los Angeles, it's before it was posted, it stripped out all the punctuation. So it was this guy saying, "Hello, I'm blah, 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 blah," one giant sentence. One of the a lot of very celebrated writers on this group, and one of them said, "Have they given up on punctuation in the old country?"
Oh,
So it
like,
took me a while to get back, but when they very kindly allowed me in, some of their older hands, people like Jack Sowers, who wrote Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan, a lot of great writers, sort of took me under their wing and pummeled my dreadful early versions of scripts, which I had previously thought were wonderful until they pointed out that perhaps they weren't. And it is a craft, so it's something you learn as you go. You never stop learning.
Yeah.
So I came over for some meeting in LA, and so this group of writers decided they'd have a little lunch, and it was in Cantor's Deli. So that was where I first, long story short, that's where I first encountered Shelley, and the rest is history. And we write together whenever possible, and Shelley's another writer on Sherlock and Daughter. So we're still motoring away.
That's fantastic. You should have told them when that came through without all the punctuation that you meant to send it as a telegram and you forgot to say stop.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it costs extra.
Yeah.
Do you remember in the old days when you had to
get on the telephone to the post?
My favorite telegram was there was a famous female journalist who had I think during the 30s, I believe, who had a really rough time, but she was always sent off to cover sort of war stories in the middle of nowhere. And she managed to get through to some South American coup, and she crossed the Andes on a mule in order to get there. And her editor had other people dotted all around the area in South America who just said, "Oh, we can't reach it. It's too difficult." And he sent a telegram to them, just 4 words, which is "off get ass, on get mule." So I thought that was a good piece of motivation. But yeah, so that was how we met.
That would be a great T-shirt, actually.
Yeah.
You should do that. We should do that.
Yeah.
So, but going back to when you were saying, the cross-culturalism of not just the writing disciplines and the stories that you had to research and the people you would get to interview, but the actual geolocation and the geopolitics that came into all of that. Is that what now maybe I understand a little bit more why this Sherlock Holmes, the wonderful David Thewlis Sherlock Holmes, has an American co-star,
co-lead,
do you think it's back in your writer's DNA that the idea came that it's not impossible for him to have an American daughter?
Yeah, I think the starting point is just my love of seeing how different cultures react and collide and merge in different ways. But it's very difficult to get something made now. And you really have to be able to say, I'm doing something that's classic, but also I'm doing something that people haven't seen before. So in a Hollywood system, people are always looking for, give me the same but different, meaning give me the same as this thing that made so much money, Harry Potter, whatever. But I've seen Harry Potter, so give me something else, something that works with it. So that tightrope of the same but different is very easy to say, but very hard to do. So we started off with the Sherlock Holmes being the most single reproduced character.
Is it really?
Yeah, according to who's to argue the Guinness World of Records, but he's supposedly, according to the Guinness World of Records, he's the most portrayed literary character in TV and cinematic history, with 25,000 different depictions on screen and in print.
Wow.
So pretty so a bit scary in a way.
You really took on a challenge though, because people have a preconceived notion.
Yeah, absolutely.
their Sherlock
Yeah.
Holmes in their head.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
and there's lots of really interesting things about that preconceived notion, because very many of the things that people associate, elementary dear Watson, the pipe, the deer stalker, that's
Yes.
not those have all, like a snowball, those have all been added since the original stories to a large extent. So many of the things which are classic Sherlock Holmes, probably have as much to do with Basil Rathbone
That's right.
as the original. So it always has been an evolutionary process. And obviously if you're just relying on the classic Holmes canon, then that's it. You can just retell those stories. But if you are giving yourself the freedom that it's now in the public domain, so the characters
That
are
was
in the public domain. So that's the big thing for me. And I was looking for something that would do. It's a big challenge, but if you're at a certain point, as you know yourselves, if you're trying to do something, you might as well take some big swings, because we're not here forever. So the idea was that we would do something with Sherlock Holmes that was absolutely true to the character in the original stories,
Ah,
but that threw something into it which shone a light on something that wasn't covered in the stories. So for me, that became, Sherlock and Daughter was built around one big question, which was what made Sherlock Sherlock. So was Sherlock Holmes born like a giant brain in a glass jar of some mad Victorian scientist, i.e., all intellect, zero emotion? Or was it just possible that there were events that helped shape him and shape that famous aversion to passion or emotion? And so, if you look at the classic Holmes and the original Holmes in the books, he experiments with just about every substance and disguise he can get his hands on, including ones that may or may not be legal, may or may not be advisable.
oh yeah,
yeah.
right.
So that's part of him. So he's a big experimenter. So on that basis, asking the question, maybe just once, did that experimentation include his exploration of his very odd version of love?
Yeah.
And if that happened with disastrous consequences, as it
Right.
probably would,
Yeah.
would that shape the person to going sort of, oh, I always knew it was all about logic, and let's get back to that, and let's not let's not tread in that dangerous emotional territory anymore. So that was just a starting point for us, really. But it gives you as the name suggests, Sherlock and Daughter. There's a big question mark over whether she is really his daughter, or whether she just thinks she is. And that's the sort of the running theme for the start of the series. I mean, effectively, we decided that there's ways to go with that if you're looking for a younger audience and an older audience, and younger and older characters, because I don't believe that just because you're younger or older doesn't mean you just want to see characters of your own age group. Obviously, that's our way into it, but this sort of really interesting relationship between Sherlock and someone rocking up on his doorstep saying, "Hello, I'm your long lost daughter you never knew about." So,
and I'm American, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. American, mixed heritage of English, Spanish, Native American, and quite an unusual background. So rather than tread that sort of, there's a well-worn path at that stage of lots of people doing youthful origin stories. So, young Sherlock, young Churchill, whatever it may be. And that's perfectly acceptable, but a lot of people do that. So I thought it would be more fun to confront Sherlock with an origin story unfolding in his mature years, with young Amelia, so that's the person claiming to be his daughter, landing in his orderly life, like a meteorite landing in Baker Street, claiming to be his daughter. And from then on, she's virtually always in this sort of little war with her mentor. So we asked, well, what would that war look like? And in every respect, it looks a lot like a father-daughter relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All of that.
If you guys haven't seen it yet, go on to Rewind. It's on the CW network in the United States and Discovery Plus in UK and Ireland.
Yeah. It's starting. It's not on Discovery yet. It's probably later in the year, but certainly the CW you can watch, and you can watch in the CW app as well for free.
And how? So the series was filmed in Dublin.
It was Dublin's fair city.
Yes, and how was that to do with tax incentives or just the?
It was to do. I mean, at the minute, without going into all the tedious politics that swirl around us, things move around the world. That the film and TV industry is just so international now.
Right.
So Sherlock and Daughter has a US broadcaster. It has funders and producers in Canada, America, Britain. It has a distributor, Fédération, in France.
Right.
The people who chipped in for it, so Warner Brothers Discovery in the UK, SBS in Australia, where it's getting its first outing in that part of the world in, I think, 2 or 3 weeks on SBS in Australia. So I know you've got some fans there who can check it out.
Yeah.
So and the 5 Nordic public broadcasters all chipped in to buy their territory, Nordic territory together. So it's got that. It's got the actors, young, old, British, Irish, American, Australian in it. So
I was fascinated with the wardrobe too.
Yes.
Beautiful work on that. I was stunned, and some of the things that happen behind the scenes are, in a way, a lot of it involves practicality. So because at the particular time there was so many period dramas being made across Europe, the poor wardrobe people had to send out emissaries doing the equivalent of a supermarket trolley dash for, we have to have such a volume. They were in France or in Spain and Italy and London and Ireland. I think they did a really good job of.
And all of it. I mean, what I love too, being the digital diva, is that, and it helps people of a certain age who may not hear great in certain television settings, or they may have headphones on or whatever. I love the digital on-screen graphics, because for me, and there are so many kids now on the spectrum who are visual learners. They think they hear what they think they've heard, but they can see the scene and they can see, and then these on-screen sort of explainer graphics pop up. It's like the chef's kiss, finishing salt on the dish.
Yeah, thank you for that. We have to put a lot of thought into that, because if you don't do it enough, you have a younger generation who are often watching something on their phone while watching something else on their computer while doing something third. And so you have to make sure that they're getting it, particularly with something that involves crimes or clues or that. And this isn't as simple as some of the on the spectrum from sort of subtitles for the heart of thinking at one level, and something that's so complex that you need to watch it 7 times. We are neither of those things, but the on-screen graphics and little scribbly pen things, I think, as long as you're using them to accent something, so you're not irritating one side of your audience and you're not under-explaining to the other. And that's particularly true when you do what we're trying to do, with one hand towards a younger audience and one hand towards an older audience. Right. And so far the numbers, such as I've seen, suggest that's really working.
Yes.
I mean, I can literally see grandparents, parents, and grandkids sitting watching this together, and the kids get to absorb all of the Arthur Conan Doyle and who was Sherlock Holmes, and then it gives them a whole world to go and explore. Now, you said that it's in the public domain. Was the estate not able to re-copyright anything at any stage?
No, after a certain stage, it just falls out of copyright.
Right.
And the estate, hats off to them. They fought a very impressive rearguard action for many years in the past, and they got themselves embroiled in a lot of legal conflicts. But everything became very clear in the last few years, which is partly why there are such a proliferation of like there's another series, Watson, which is set in the present day, but is essentially about Dr. Watson. And there's lots of very good stuff. There's just lots of good what if ideas coming up. But that's the business reason behind it is that it's public domain. And I mean, it might be interesting to touch on one thing there, that writers, like actors, often get typecast. So I've got a few different typecast hats. One for a while was that I did a lot of Nordic Noir crime. And so I became sort of the go-to, even though, what is this stray Irishman doing, writing multiple Scandi Noir murder series. But
Murder in Helsinki.
Yeah.
Followed by Murder in Oslo.
Yeah. But luckily, just because one or two of them did very well, it becomes a thing in itself. But recently, the reason I mention it is that another thing that I'm finding myself increasingly asked to do. So Sherlock Daughter, based on very famous intellectual property IP in the public domain. But now people who love that Victorian era are... I have another show which is called Fairy Tale Detective, which is about Hans Christian Andersen. It's just in development now, but Hans Christian Andersen, who obviously all of his works, all of his fairy tales are in the public domain. But in my version, he's as the real one was. The real one was a bit pompous, and he was a bit put out that no one wanted him to write serious, tomes on, Afro-ethnography or historical whatever. And they all said, well, that's fine, but do you have any more of that ugly duckling? And it used to narc him that people wanted this more. So in my version, he's so fed up with this that he wants to get taken, he wants to get taken seriously as an author, as a writer. And when that doesn't happen, he thinks, I'll do something completely different. I'll become a detective and I'll out Sherlock Holmes. I'll be the famous detective of the age. But because he's so annoying, no one wants to work with him. And the police don't want anything to do with him. And in the end, he finds the only people who will work with him to solve crimes are his own imaginary fairy tale characters, acting like Watson to Holmes, with the final twist that they don't like him either. So because they blame him for how he wrote them. So the little tin soldier with only one leg, for instance, says, how would you like to hop through eternity just for your plot point? Or just each of them have the little match girl is having a go at him, saying, well, how hard would it have been for you to write me just one good slap up meal so that I wasn't starving to death in your story? So there is I think if you're a writer, you have to be able to look for those trends. And that particular trend is famous characters who are now in the public domain, but people don't want to simply rehash the original stories. They want to tell something for a modern audience, but with respect for the original stories. So something that has
I think Quentin Tarantino knocked onto that 25 or 30 years ago, right? When Shakespeare was it was opening season on Shakespeare. And
absolutely. A
whole bunch of movies. But, in the music industry, copyright was 50 years after the writer's death. It expired. And because John Lennon was murdered at 40 years old, and Yoko had, Sean, who was 3 or 4 at the time, she was very, very instrumental in getting the copy of the US music. I don't know anything about characters, but the music copyright law is now 70 years. after a while.
And I think it's different in different parts of the world as well, which is
characters and love songs and all of that stuff. But when you think about some of these musical artists who died at 27, left behind young kids, 40, 50 years goes by in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now you can do derivative copyrights. You can re-copyright songs if you make a slight change and change the title. And, there's people selling their catalogs and re-copywriting them and whatever. But that's when you go into, as an artist, as you guys both are, and you go into writing for a career, boy, it must come as a shock when you suddenly have to absorb and learn all of this legal mumbo jumbo.
And frankly, it's not my favorite part of the business. I've often said, in the middle of some of these battles, when I set out to be a writer, my ambition wasn't to be sort of a half-assed junior paralegal, come accountant, come lawyer, but you need to. That's another advantage to having been around the block a bit. I think you get at some point you've fallen down most of the major holes that you can't fall down, and you always think, well, I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to make sure that's covered. So the good news is that you're not making those mistakes again. But the bad news is that the longer you're in that side of the business, maybe the more defensive or hyper vigilant you get. So American contracts tend to be much bigger than in the rest of the world. I mean, I recall one. It was actually a feature, but it was boxes of legal agreements in like whatever American letter or A4 boxes, and it came up so it was taller than I was when I was standing beside it. And then in some other countries, like certain aspects in somewhere like Denmark, they will just have something decided by Danish law, and it's 2 pages, and either you sign it or you don't.
Wow.
So it's very different, and back to these sort of cultural differences. But we're living. I'm not going to go off on an AI rant because it's such a nuanced subject. But it is, when you're talking about copyright and you see something that you have written, maybe a novel, which has just been what they call scraped, it's just been hoovered up off the internet and used to train things. And you think, well, actually, I did quite a lot of work on that. Thank you very much. You didn't ask for permission. So now there's this, I think it's always like the Wild West. There's always this period, say, as happened with the internet, there's this period when anything goes and everyone's splashing around. And then gradually it gets codified. It's a bit like my favorite TV show of all time is Deadwood. By David Milch, and it's about.
We had the special effects makeup guy here for brunch yesterday.
Very good, very good. That's hats off to them. So that was about the Wild West being run by the criminals and saloon keepers, and then the very early laws come in. And you have the titans of industry who are maybe the biggest bullies of all, and the local villains who, ironically, even though they're sort of murderous scallywags, do actually have a connection to the local population, and all of that eventually is culminating in that case in laws, in becoming a state, becoming part of the union. So the same thing's happening now, but just as we were settling down after the internet, along comes AI, and suddenly all bets are off. Who owns what, and you have to really fight for what you've created.
Well, we're trying to do, we're the sort of the sheriff of AI. We own McCartney.ai, and Martin is working with voice actors and famous voices, broadcasters, whatever. We have something called the Verified Voice Vault, where you can record your voice, store it with us. We can watermark it, and then if you get cloned, we have a partnership in London that can literally listen to the silence in the cloned file and tell you the algorithm of the software that produced it. And recently they tracked down, during the last election, politicians were being cloned to say things on Facebook that they didn't say. And so they managed to track down one of these clones by just listening to the silence and measuring the little algorithm on there. They tracked it down to a place in Eastern Europe, the actual company and the actual building where they were doing it. So we've started verified voice
That's
vault.
great. That's terrific. I mean, I think the big challenge again is that, and it relates to what we're saying about all of these different countries and backgrounds, that the individual countries are barely now getting their act together on things like that. And then once you're faced with someone who's in his mother's basement in Georgia on his laptop, then it's finding them. But there's, no one has managed to yet really codify, although there are plenty of laws that are already being broken. But it's a bit like playing whack-a-mole at the minute.
Absolutely is. Well, and there are countries in the world that are making money from doing this, that, A, we have no jurisdiction, B, they don't have copyright laws. So
and there are different, I agree completely. There's countries that also have, even countries that do have copyright laws, some of them have different mindsets. So for instance, the Chinese, and the Chinese are a lot actually better with copyright than people give them credit for, but there is an underlying attitude that they would look at something like the invention of the wheel, and they would say, well, there wasn't someone back in the day saying, I thought up the wheel, you can't use the wheel. People would look at the world's first wheel and say, what an excellent idea. I'll chip out my own one out of stone. And then someone thought, wouldn't it be easier out of wood? So that sort of evolution means that certain ideas become sort of currency, collective currency.
Well, it's like the 100 monkeys theory, isn't it? You can't prove who thought of what first.
Which monkey was me?
Right.
I was that monkey.
Yeah, exactly.
I wanted to ask you, your project, the Man Who Died, you adapted. It achieved quite a lot of
hello. It's the wine.
Sometimes the wine, significant success on Elisa, Viaplay. So what lessons did you take from that experience, and how did they inform your work on Sherlock?
I think, first of all, the Man Who Died is very close to my heart. It's just coming out with its first season was their most successful Scandinavian original series in a very long time, and it's just gone on to a second season, which is just coming out. It's actually getting its very first outing in Australia on SBS in 2 or 3 weeks. So I'm popular on SBS for about 1 month. I've got three series on the go.
Good on you.
They're amazing, but that's the first time it's ever happened for me anyway. But The Man Who Died, so you could not at one level have a more, not just Nordic, but quintessentially Finnish series. The Finns have this, they obviously have that Nordic Noir, the darkness and the snow, but they also have this one. I've got so many Finnish friends, from the producers to the actors to the crew, but they also have this great sort of very quirky sense of humor. So the closest thing to it internationally are the Coen brothers. So something like Fargo, that's sort of darkly funny, very quirky, and they even have a genre called Finnish Weird, and Finnish Weird is just that sort of off-kilter, but very funny, but very, it's got something in common with Liverpool sense of humor as well, and Belfast, that sort of,
you calling me weird?
that people are, you've made a friend if someone makes fun of you, whereas in other parts of the world it's, why has this person insulted me? And so it's that sort of subversive, probably a bit darker than some of some of our sense of humor. So that was the starting point. There's a guy called Antti Tuominen, who is a wonderful author, just beat a path to the door. If you want most of his books are available in English, and they're just fantastic, quirky crime novels. Just a great writer. And so I worked with him, and we worked very, very carefully, particularly in the first season. I was following the plot of his book, and we were discussing, would characters do this, wouldn't they? And they're all these sort of larger than life, quirky characters, very much like the Coen brothers world. I mean, even the Coen brothers cinematography, Roger Deakins, everything's in sort of wide angle and all these sort of big weird faces looming in at people. So it's got that sort of slightly unreal vibe to it. But the characters are very likable, but very, in a way, very ordinary. So this particular one is about this poor guy, Yakko, and Yakko is a wild mushroom entrepreneur. So he has this little company, and people go out to the forests and gather these matsutake mushrooms, which are sort of like the nearest thing to a phallic symbol that's ever grown on the earth. But they're very popular in Japan. And so he sells them to this Japanese market, and then one day he's not feeling that great, and he goes to the doctor, and he finds out that he's been slow poisoned by mushrooms by persons unknown. And there's a running gag in it, which is that all mushrooms are edible, but some are only edible once. So this poor character, and he's a lovely guy, but he takes his company very seriously, and he's been sort of sleepwalking through life a bit, and he's leaving sort of voice memos to himself about you must order more punnets. There's all this very sort of dull little life that he's been leading, and his relationships haven't really been going anywhere. And suddenly he has maybe a few weeks to live, and
who died.
Yeah, absolutely. So he has a choice, and he decides that he's going to spend them trying to save his company and trying to investigate who's trying to bump him off. And he thinks it may be his good lady wife, or it may be the rival mushroom company in this little town in Finland, or it may be the Japanese who he's supplying. So he's got this very long list of suspects, and only a few weeks to find out.
He should have called Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, otherwise he was filming in Dublin. So that's the basic story, and that to me it does say the best of looking at different cultures that have something in common, because in the second season that's coming up, there's a big Japanese element, but the Japanese also have their what they call Japanese weird. So it's sort of off kilter in a different way, but they're first cousins. So they both get what's going on, even though they couldn't be more different cultures. And the Americans get it through bless the Coen brothers for their humor and their, just doing such wonderful work. But because of them, that same vibe is quite well known around the world. So as soon as you say, if you like the Coen brothers, we hope you like this, they get what it is.
That's right.
I'm having a brain fart at the moment. What was the series that really brought Netflix? It was Steven Van Zandt in Norway. It wasn't.
Lillehammer. Yeah.
That was the very first one I remember watching.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. Scandinavian dark weird.
Yeah. And then the other Norwegians and the Swedes were more into the straightforward, pure dark crime. So things like Borgen and The Bridge. Those were the start of it. And something that we touched on, this sort of everything has to evolve, whether it be Sherlock Holmes or anything else. And even in those Scandi Noir, what was working there, the very dark, gloomy sort of it's always raining and there's always
Yes,
a middle-aged detective with an alcohol problem, and
right.
it was very, very dark, and it was becoming a little bit of a parody of itself. So even though people absolutely loved the
Yes,
first ones, you couldn't just keep making them.
right.
So now they're investigating, there's more emotion, and at some point Nordic Noir would stop being Nordic Noir because it wouldn't be noir enough. It would be,
It would be Monty Python.
Nordic comedy or something.
Yeah.
But there is there's a place to explore,
Yeah.
and you have to evolve.
The other one was Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and that had new. I think that had new elements. It certainly had the more female perspective, and I find that's something really interesting for me. And people sometimes have this sort of very male, female, young, old, and I don't see that at all. But I do think that a lot of what I've been writing in recent years has had interesting female leads or co-leads, because traditionally a lot of the roles, I'm going back decades, but there were a lot of female roles that didn't have that much depth, and you had to be the love interest or the heroine to be saved or whatever.
Yeah.
And
I tell you what just jumped into my mind, the Eurovision.
Yeah, they don't. Oh no, that wasn't. No, that was just a flat out Will Ferrell comedy. That wasn't anything.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
But
it's the same. It's the same thing. I mean, it happens in comedy too. So with
parody was the Nordic Noir thing, because they took this band from Iceland and made them, completely absolute asinine idiots.
Yeah. There's always
If Monty Python met Nordic Noir, right?
Yeah. I think that's an interesting area to mine. So as long as you're in all of these things, as long as you're sort of being respectful to what it is. If it's a Western, then one of the biggest characters in any Western has to be the landscape. So there are sort of rules that you mess with at your peril. If you're going, in my opinion, if you're going to do something like Sherlock Holmes with Sherlock and Daughter, then you have to be very respectful to the core Sherlock Holmes character. Yes. So it wouldn't work if he was a modern anarchist who had nothing to do with Sherlock Holmes, and the young person was coming from the outside world. Then there wouldn't be that contrast. So it sort of gets back to being respectful to what is classic, but not putting yourself in such a straitjacket that you just end up telling the same story for centuries.
So tell the kids, looking ahead, are there any other, are you working, you said Hans Christian Andersen as classic literary character. Is there another sort of person from the past that you could imagine yourself reimagining?
Well, I've been asked. Unfortunately, I can't talk about some of them. But if you throw a rock at famous sort of 19th century characters, who I can mention, lots of people are looking at Bram Stoker, for instance. Author of Dracula. So there's a lot of that going on, but I think also there's times for doing something which is purely about the present day. And I'm working on a really interesting one with German and Irish co-producers, which is about scammers, so present day, and it's about elderly woman who is scammed out of really hefty amount of money by one of these sort of online love rats.
Yeah.
And she's forced to go to a sort of victim support group, and they're all trying to be very nice and support each other. And there are people who are hustled out of money, people who are terribly embarrassed because they were a police officer and they should have known better, and all sorts of characters. And they're going around trying to be supported, but then the group facilitator leaves the room and they stop for a minute, and then they look at each other and say, bastards. And then they spend the rest of the time trying to say what they would do to these hackers if they caught them for causing so much misery. So they turn themselves into this sort of like online elderly vigilantes.
Somebody last week, I saw a meme of, I think it's British Telecom has like an AI granny who, if you get a call, she just wastes her time. For years, Ange has been saying to these people who call, she's like, oh, you sound nice.
What are you wearing?
Yeah, fantastic. Just
busy later. And then she's like, where are you calling from? And they say, I'm calling from Cupertino. And it's obviously a phone room in the middle of nowhere, you know.
Yeah.
I'm calling from Cupertino. And she's like, oh, really? Well, you look out the window. What's the weather doing? And they're like, well, you know, it's 72 and sunny. She's like, you know, I don't think so, because I got the weather app on my phone. It's supposed to be raining where you are. She just figures the more time she can waste, the less people they get to scam.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a big thing. And there are also people online who now wreak terrible revenge on them, but they hack into, in these scam centers maybe in India or Pakistan, for example, they hack into the cameras.
Great.
And then you see them running around like headless chickens when they realize that it's actually been turned on them. So I thought that was a really, sometimes you can get a new modern idea of that.
Libya is another big place. They own the .ly domain name. So if you've ever been to Bitly to shorten the link, you're putting all of your data into a Libyan web server.
It's we live in this big connected world, and you have to be pretty careful. But so that's a sort of fairly lighthearted. Another thing that just very briefly that people are discovering now is that because everything's so doomy and gloomy, and the whole tariffs and just we are in a very unsettled world now. There's people are more looking for things that they can not just escapist, but things that are a bit more optimistic. So I thought a sort of a vigilante online Miss Marple was a good way of cheering people up, and we've got a role model there.
If you need any funny chat, waste your time on it.
Absolutely.
Give her a call.
A whole new revenue stream.
Somebody asking me, is that snow behind you? Are you in a cabin in Wisconsin?
Well, since I'm back to our previous conversation about looking at your app, since I'm actually in Santa Monica at the minute, I hope not.
It looks like snow.
I don't know.
Your blinds must be super clean.
Yeah, squeaky. I don't know. Maybe fallout, nuclear fallout, perhaps.
Well, I know this is a Southern Irish tradition because the name of the poem is Limerick, but our regular viewers will know that before we close out, and thank you so much for your time, because I know how up the wall you and Shelley both are. Ange is the Limerick lady. She has a book out called Mrs. McCartney's Liverpool Limericks and Other Random Irish Haikus.
Excellent.
And we didn't even talk about Johnny Was, but people should go Google that. But if you are sitting comfortably, then we will read you your personalized limerick. Are you ready?
Thank you. I am braced.
Braced. Good. And a 1, 2, 3. From Belfast, young Brendan took flight, wrote thrillers and tales full of bite. From Johnny Was fame to Sherlock's new game, he delivers each twist with delight. Ta-da!
Bless you. I shall have it tattooed on my posterior for future generations. That's
she wants to watch.
Can I watch?
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, well, thanks a lot.
So tell us where people can find you. IMDb, I presume, is your...
IMDb or
Facebook.
Filmfoley.com is my own little empire.
So
just Google is your friend, although you don't want to believe everything you read on Google.
That's absolutely true.
Or particularly AI Google. So that's a whole new ChatGPT, or what comes up now if you use a search engine changes by the day.
Absolutely. No, everybody's loving it. Thank you so much. This will be up on our YouTube channel and available via TeaFlixTuesdays.com very shortly.
Great.
And I will send out everybody the link. And thanks so much for taking the time.
Such a delight. And just lovely to spend time together.
Absolutely. We'll have to do it in person over a cup of tea or something stronger.
Look forward to that.
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
Give our
Cheers.
love to your beautiful wife.
Shelley.
Love to you both. Bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.